In the last lesson, we mentioned that we can handle a view just like any regular table, and we could update it, insert some data to it, or delete records from it. However, there are some conditions that we need to follow, so our view has to be created by those conditions so we can make changes to the underlying tables which are present in our view object. So I'm gonna recreate our employees filter view, which just returns employee ID named as ID, concatenation of the last name and first name named with the alias name, and the phone number with the alias phone, and with the condition that we return only the employees which have salary lower than 5,000. And if we check the data from that view, we can see we got number of rows returned. And for example, if we want to update the phone number, we can do that directly over the view. So the syntax would be the same as with any update on the table. So update employees filter, set the name of the column we want to update. This will be phone. Note that now I'm using the view alias and not the underlying select query column name from the table. We're gonna set the phone number to 555 and only for the row with the ID 105. So where ID equals 105. Again, I'm using the column alias from our view. So let's execute this update. We can see that one row has been updated, and we can check that data, and we see that indeed that field has been changed. We can check also that directly on the employees table, and we'll see that the actual data has been changed on the underlying table, which is in our case the employees table, right? We could also delete that row without any problems. So delete from the name of the view where ID equals 105, right? And one row is gonna be deleted. Let's check the view, and that record is not present anymore. Very nice. However, if we try to insert some data over that view, so it would be as insert into the view name, values, and for example, we'll try to insert some employee with ID 1000, last name and first name as Smith John, and the phone number just 555, right? When we try to execute this insertion, it's gonna fail because we are trying to go over some constraints. There are actually two constraints that we are not following, which are in our view. The first one is that we are using expression, so we cannot insert a value like directly because the engine wouldn't know how to split the last name and the first name for the underlying table, right? And the second one is that underlying table, the employees one, has some other constraints. For example, this one has the not null constraint, and we have to insert some data if you want to insert another row to the employees table. So if we check the employees table, we can see that the employee ID, last name, email, hard date, and job ID have a not null constraint, and we have to also provide that data so that insertion will be successful. Since in our view we do not have those columns, we cannot insert that data. There are also other constraints which prevents us to use update, insertion, or deletion over a view on the underlying table. So for our example, I'm creating a view which is a little bit more complex than the previous one. And this one has all of the constraints which prevents us to do some update, deletion, or insertion on the underlying tables. First, let's check the content of that view. So let's select all from that view, and we can see that view returns just 4 rows. The first constraint that prevents us to modify some data on the underlying tables of a view is the distinct, as distinct would return only one value if we would have a case where multiple rows would be of the same content. So the database engine wouldn't know how to update or which row to update in case if we try to modify it over a view. The second is using the expressions, as already explained in our previous example. The following one is using the grouping, so the engine wouldn't know which salary to update as we are fetching the salary sum over that view. Another one is using the subquery in our view. And lastly is using the joins, so the database wouldn't know which underlying table to update. For the joins, there is actually cases when we can manipulate the underlying tables over a view, but this is out of the scope of this course and also the certification exam. Be sure to check the resources under this lesson and try this stuff out. This is it for this one, and see you in the next one.